Here you go.
Oh, this is Antioch Baptist Church in Rochester, Indiana, and welcome to our Sunday school. And we appreciate you tuning in to us. We trust that what we share will be a blessing and encouragement to you. Last week we were finishing up our beginning of a new series and referring to the mind that God has given us, the creative mind, so to speak. But basically we've entitled this, What's on Your Mind? And in this day and time, it's no telling what might be on your mind. There's a lot of things that we can, if we're not careful, develop a real anxiety about when we look at what's happening in our country today, what's happening in our neighborhoods, and what's happening around the world. It can be quite disturbing. So if we were to ask you that question, what's on your mind? I wonder what you might say. Maybe someone might say, well, COVID's still on my mind. Someone else might say, well, she's on my mind, or he's on my mind, or whatever the case might be. And so when we think in terms of this series, I trust that it will help us when we realize that God is the one that has created our minds. And the mind is far superior to any computer that's ever been developed by man, so to speak. And it's interesting how much of the computer has been developed because of our brain. But as we think on this last week, we were finishing up, and I wanted to share just the points with you one more time before we get into our message. So we'll go back over just a brief review. But from last week's lesson, we said the human mind was a fascinating work of God, and that's probably an understatement, but it really is. It is a designed creation under divine control with an ability to make deliberate choices. And so as we think of the mind again, it's just amazing when we think of the Creator. In Psalms 19:14, the Lord explains it this way when we talk about the mind. It says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. And so again, the mind is very, very fascinating. We could get into great depth, and that would be okay, I guess, if we did, but we're just going to kind of lightly hit upon the mind over the next several, next several months. I trust that it will be a blessing to you. But when we talk about our lesson today, we want to talk to you about the changed mind, and it's exciting how God can change your mind. I was talking to one of our teenagers just a few moments ago before we started, and she said, Pastor, I have a real problem with anxiety, and I just had just a terrible time. And I just shared with her that I take multivitamin B, and that really helps me with my anxiety. And several times I've experimented, and I would stop taking it for a few days, and then suddenly I realized I need it. And I don't want to say I'm addicted to it, but apparently there's some sort of deficiency in my body. So when I take the multivitamin B vitamin, it helps me, and the anxiety goes away, or at least it becomes more tolerable. And so she said, well, I'm going to try that, preacher. And so I'll probably try to remember to buy some vitamin D to give to her to help her. But when we talk about the changed mind, I think of all the medications, I'll say medications that are out there to help people with problems that they have with their mind. And there's medications for people that are bipolar. There's people, there's medication or whatever for people that are schizophrenic, and we just go down the list. And so it's amazing to think that there's actually chemicals that can be given to us to change our mind. And so again, it's very important when we talk about a changed mind that we realize that the creator of the mind can change our mind into a proper instrument for God. And so that's exciting to me. In Lamentations chapter 3, verse 22 through 23, and I think it's interesting as we look at the Bible, because so many times we think, well, that's in the Old Testament, or well, that's in the New Testament. And we treat them like they're two separate books, and yet it's the same book. And so it's amazing how they tie together. Again, we have to remember that the same mind was involved in the workings that we know as the Bible today. And of course, that's the mind of God. So as we look here in verse 22, Lamentations chapter 3, it says, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. And I think there's some songs that even have that type of wording in it. Again, inspired by the Word of God. But as we look here, it's exciting for us to realize that God is aware of our mind. He knows more about our mind than we do. There's no psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever that can come anywhere near knowing the mind of God, if you please. And yet, as we look at God, we know that He's so stable that He truly is an anchor that we can latch onto to help us, to give us stability in our life as we follow His teachings. So again, it says that they are new every morning. And so every day is really a new day. And every day there's something new that's going to happen in our life, and a new experience or a new knowledge that will be given to us or whatever. And so as a result, we see that we need to lean upon God's faithfulness, because great is His faithfulness, and He can see us through whatever is coming our way. Here's the thing, God knows what's going to happen in our lives. He knows what we're going to face, if you please, 10 years from now. And of course, I'm hoping 10 years from now we'll all be in heaven, and I think that'd be great, and be exciting to say the least. And we definitely would have a new mind. We would have the mind of Christ within us, and that would be a perfect mind. And just so many wonderful things that happened. I met some people last night at dinner, and I knew them, and then finally one person just mentioned her name of her husband who had passed away to me, that I knew who she was, and she said I was a burden. And I think she did it for our benefit, so we knew who she was, because we hadn't seen her in years. But
who was it?
She said her name was Burton, and so I'm not sure.
Kathy Klinger?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So and I would have never put that together, And so the kids came in, and of course, Gerald, when I talked to her last night, she said, "Do you know Dan Knickerbocker?" I go, "Well, I don't know. It sounds kind of familiar. How do you forget a name like that?" And find out he's from Fort Worth, and Texas, and so he apparently knew us back years ago. In fact, the minute he heard it was Antioch, he said, "Y'all from Jerry Pitman's church." So that was pretty neat. And so we were trying to place him, and so I was trying to ask everybody. I asked one of the kids, I said, "Was your speaker, was he very old?" And she said, "Oh, no." And I said, "Was he old like me or look like?" She said, "You're not old, preacher." So, she's trying to win points with me. And so I said, "You're not over 55, are you, Pastor?" And anyhow, I'll remember them at Christmas. But what am I trying to, well, maybe I won't because of my age. But anyhow, what am I trying to say? The brain is so fantastic. The mind is just unbelievable. And the fact that God has given us a book that can help us and meet whatever's happening in our mind at that particular time. And again, as I think of the challenge that he oftentimes shared. In fact, I think when it was on Mars Hill. Now Mars Hill was there in Greece, and one of the things about it was considered the educated focus point of the world of that day and time. The Greeks were considered to be very wise, extremely intelligent, and so forth. And the Romans would often have to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. They would oftentimes have a Greek teacher or tutor in their home, and they would refer to, well, he's from Mars Hill area, so he's really smart, or whatever. And so Paul, when he was witnessing to these people, we find his sermon on Mars Hill, it was very highly focused upon those that consider themselves to be wise and intellectually superior to anyone else in the world. And so as he was dealing with these people, one of the problems that they had is they were pluralistic. And what that means is they believed in many gods. And so as he was walking through Mars Hill, he saw all these statues to the various gods. I mean, they had gods for things that you wouldn't even begin to believe, whether it was a god to the insects or a god to the reptiles or a god to the fish. But all over they had these gods on that hill. And Paul, as he began talking to him, he just referred to the fact, he said, "You're very superstitious." But he said, "I noticed as I was looking at all your altars to the various gods," he said, "I saw one that said it was a altar to the unknown God. And the Greeks, because of their intelligence and their wisdom, they were fearful that maybe they missed a God, and they didn't want to offend that God because they missed him. So they said, we'll put it to the unknown God. And I don't know if that has anything to do with the tomb to the unknown soldiers. I think it does somewhat, because we realize that there's people that were lost in battle and they were never found. But our country wanted to show honor to those that were willing to go and fight, and even though they were unknown or we don't know where they're at this time, they honored them for their giving their all to the conflict for our country. And so, as we think in terms of Paul, he said, I want to talk to you and show you the unknown God. And so, very interesting as we get into this and see how that he dealt with these people that were the, I'll use the word, the brainiacs of their day. And so as he talked to them, he admonished them, and he pointed out something that sounded kind of strange, that he said, basically, I want to change their minds. And that was his whole purpose of sharing it. And folks, it's very important that we have a changed heart. But we find that the heart and the mind are tied together. And so again, the mind will affect what the heart can receive, and then the heart can do the same on the other end. And it's amazing that you study anything about the chemistry of thinking and so forth, how we rationalize. It's been said that the woman has 5 times more rationing chemical in her heart than a man does. And I think that's interesting, because if you've ever tried to please a woman, I don't know if that's coming out right, but anyhow, you know, she'll say you're moving furniture in the house, and so she'll say, put that chair right there. Yeah, that'd be good. And you're thinking, well, I want it in front of the TV because I want to see the TV. You know, as a man, you just think that's the best place for it, right there in front of the TV. And this, no, I think you need to move it over here, and because aesthetically it'll look better in this. But no, just move that chair out and put this chair in this place. And, anyhow, that must sound anything like a woman. But anyhow, I want to say this. They're thinking with their heart a lot of times, and so as a result, they see things totally different, and we have less of that chemical in our heart. So us guys, we just say, well, this is just the most logical thing. Let's set it up this way, and I can see my football games or whatever you might be wanting to watch. But simply, when we think about the mind and the heart do, if you please, work together. And so this chemistry, or the chemicals that we have in our brain and our thinking matter, is very, very exciting to get to studying some of that stuff. But as we think on this, the important thing is we want to get our mind tuned in with God's mind. And that's exciting when we can have God working through us, and great things can happen, and things that bring glory to our God. And yet, on the other hand, our mind many times is influenced by this world. It's influenced by others. It's influenced by the devil. And we can do terrible things. And with our mind, we can imagine awful things, and yet at the same time, we can think upon wonderful things. And so the goal of our lesson today is to basically help you see that we are worshiping, like Paul emphasized there on Mars Hill, the living God. And I'm so glad that our God's alive, that he's not some sort of stone or rock, or I say stone or rock, same thing, I guess, or some metal or whatever, or a piece of wood. He's so much more. He's very, very much alive. And really, in comparison, he's more alive than we are. And in him, all life comes. So the goals I want to share with you today in this lesson is simply I want you to take an inventory of your life, looking for any lifeless idols that you may be serving. And again, when I say that, it's amazing how easily we can get distracted off in certain areas. And as a result, we find ourselves involved in things that maybe we thought we'd never gotten into. And so what happens is we become guilty of serving false idols, false gods. You need to realize that God is just as much alive now as he was when Paul was preaching there on Mars Hill. And so we need to apply a lot of the things that Paul shared with those people, trying to, in one sense, convince them that the unknown God is the God that they need to turn to, and to turn away from all those false gods. So we need to understand that God is a God of second, third, fourth, and I can go on down the chances. he gives us more than one chance to accept him. We see that God is something else too. He's so long-suffering. And if we reflect back in our life, how many times can we see how long-suffering, how patient God was with us in so many situations, and maybe we look back at certain things and go, I can't believe I ever did it. I can't believe I said that. And as we look back on those things, we just realize that God in his love and mercy brought us to where we are today. So desire to repent of any unconfessed sin so that they may draw you closer to God. When you get rid of that sin in your life, that sin pulls you away from God. That sin holds you from God. It anchors you in such a way that you can't move. And so when you get rid of that sin, then you get that freedom to get in a closer and better relationship with God and truly get to know the mind of God and how exciting that is. So all these are things that we want to share with you today. And our text for today is Acts chapter 17, verses 29 and 30. And as we look here in Acts chapter 17, and again, we're going back to Mars Hill. I was talking to my daughter-in-law, and I believe she's been there on Mars Hill. And of course, she's been in 27 countries, so she's been around the world literally. But it says, for as much as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold, or silver, or stone, graven by art and man's devices. And the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent. I guess it's more way of saying that God does have a sense of humor, that God is aware of how silly we can be. And yet, even though we can be so silly and trite, God still loves us. And even though we may put God down, we may, if you please, call God bad names or just think bad things about God, God still loves us. I'm so glad that he is a loving God. But I'm so glad that he's not just loving, that he's forgiving. And he can forgive us of whatever we've done. God can save anyone. And that's one reason we've got our church special Wednesday nights. We're praying for the salvation of our leaders in our country. And we think how exciting it would be to see them get saved. And many people have this tendency to say, well, there's no way they're ever going to get saved. They're a devout atheist, or they're a devout agnostic, or they're a devout communist or socialist or whatever. So there's just no way. And what we're doing is we're living to God, because God truly can save anyone. Paul was testimony to that, how that he was saved in spite of his zealous religious background that he had. So we notice something else as we get into our introduction. As we notice, as Paul goes to this place of the intellectuals of those days, I guess it'd be like us going to Harvard or Princeton or some place like that, and trying to reason with the people concerning the Creator and the creation, instead of evolution, if you please. So as he goes to Mars Hill, people come to hear him because they like hearing about new things. And they heard that he had a really strange story to tell about somebody coming that was killed and came back to life. And anyhow, they just heard all these unusual things about a God that loves them. And so they came to hear more about this strange God. And how sad to many people, our God is strange. And yet to us that know him, I guess we could say he's strangely wonderful. I mean, really greater than mysteries of godliness. But we see that while Paul was here, he dealt with these people, and many of these people were open-minded. So I give that to their credit, that they were willing, but because of open-mindedness, they went after this and after that and so forth. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, in other words, referring to the fact that we were all created by God. God is aware of every person that's upon this earth. God knows everything that's in your mind, everything that's in your heart. He knows everything there is to know about you, and yet he still loves us. And to me, that is so amazing. But he says we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold. In other words, something that we can make with our own hands. So, well, this is what God must be like. And he's not, or silver, says, or stone, or graven images, which are made by man's hands. But he makes it very clear that God, even though we can be so ignorant of him, he's not ignorant of us, and he loves us. So it goes on in this verse, it says, "At the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent." So what's the key to having a better mind? It's accepting the mind that God has for you. Accepting the mind of Christ within us. In Acts chapter 17, verse 29 through 29 through 30, that's where we read those verses. And again, it's good to study the Sermon on Mars Hill. When I was in Bible college, I had to memorize it. And the particular professor had Dr. Earl K. Oldham. He had me not only memorize it, but he had to remember all the punctuation marks, all the capitals and everything else. It had to be word perfect and everything. He wouldn't let it have any variance whatsoever, which is fine. But it says, as we look at this verse again, their thinking about God was wrong. It needed to be changed because they had a tendency to confine God to whatever they could create, to whatever image they could make. That was the confines that they placed God, or excuse me, the gods in. So the wrong thinking is a result of our sin nature. And our sin nature, again, can be very, very frightening things that we can accept, things that we can say that that's really okay, that's all right, it feels good, do it. There's so much danger in that type of philosophy, and yet we see it permeate our society today. And how sad. And people use different words to try to cover it up, make it sound all right. But not only are we born sinners, but we are born with a sin nature that is our very being, our makeup is sinful. And we need to keep that in mind, that we are a tainted people, that we have many might refer to it as a disease. And yes, it's the disease that brings death to us eventually because of our sin that makes up our mind and our hearts. So we see as we look here again that we need to be careful not to let the natural side win out in the spiritual battle. And it's said this way in the scriptures in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 and 3. It says, "And you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins, where in times past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince and the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, among whom also we all had our conversations in times past, in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, even as others." But if you notice special emphasis, Paul was referring to himself. He said, I was guilty of these things myself. And we need to be careful not to put ourselves above other people. I don't know about you, but I have a problem with people that think they're better than me. And I have a problem with people that think they're better than everybody else. And it seems to be a lot in our politics today too, doesn't it? But what I'm trying to say is that we need to realize that we are sinners saved by grace. It's by God's grace and by his mercy that we're going to heaven and not to damnation. We often focus on the lifestyle that needs to change at salvation. But conversion also involves a changed mind. Interestingly, the word repentance simply means a change of mind. And a lot of people are not aware of it, but the word repentance means a change of mind. And so it's important for us to let God help us in the changing of our mind so we can see things differently. I mean, think about it. A lost person, they see you here sitting in a church building, and they go, what's he doing in church? Or what's she doing in church? Man, that's got to be so boring. They hear the same message over and over again. And folks, I'll confess, every service we always preach about getting saved. We're always sharing with people how to trust Christ as their Savior. And we feel that is so very, very important because God says it is important. But God says that because of a changed mind, because of a changed heart, we can come to church and actually enjoy church. We can actually look forward to church. And that's something exciting. It's sad when a person that claims to be a Christian suddenly goes, well, I just don't really need to go Wednesday nights. I just don't really need to go Sunday nights. I don't really need to go, to Sunday school. I don't really need to go, and they just start eliminating one service after another. And yet, folks, there's others that go, man, it's Wednesday, we got church tonight. Isn't that great? Or, wow, service will be over here soon, and I'm enjoying it. I hope you are. I'm enjoying the services, but we got evening services too tonight. And I'm looking forward to the Sunday night service. That's something about it. And so we should be excited because our mind and our heart's been changed. And we think in terms that I can learn more about God. I can learn more and love and appreciate Him for what He's done for me. So there is this more evident that when we come face to face with God, that we need His help. We need His direction. We need to be with His people. Notice what it says in the Isaiah chapter 6. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and His train filled the temple. Then said I, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So again, if I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not had sin. But now they have no cloak for their sin. John 15:22. So Paul pulls his cloak off their wrong thinking by presenting to them the unknown God to them. And so simply, as we look here, can we identify with Isaiah, who said that he lived among a wicked and evil people, that the generation he was a very ungodly people? And I can't help but think, as I think for our leadership, the National Democratic Convention that they had a couple years ago when they were going to nominate Biden to be their choice for president and Harris to be their vice president, when they met in their meeting, they purposely, when they did the Pledge of Allegiance, they left out God. They purposely left out God. So showing beyond any shadow of doubt that we're going to go away from the old ways, the ways that made our country great, and we're turning from God and we're becoming our own gods. And our socialistic government, our communist government, will become the God of all the people. All the people depend upon us to take care of them, and they'll think what we want them to think, and if they think contrary, we'll just get rid of them. Wow, the Chinese, what they do is they take those people and they cut up their organs. And China is making billions of dollars on selling organs. And it's a shame that many people here in our country have bought organs from people that they just took them because some actually said there was a God. How terrible. And they actually believed there was a God. So they were put into a prison, and then they would start cutting the organs out, keeping them alive as long as they could to take as many organs as they could. And then finally they take the final organ that would kill them. And that's going on at an unbelievable rate right now, what's happening. And so how sad. But when people turn from God, human life means nothing. And it just becomes, well, if I can kill him and get ahead, I'll do it. If I can kill him and make good money, it takes good care of my family, or whatever they might think in terms of. So here we find that Paul presents to him a living God. I mean, let's face it, if you have a God that's made of stone, that's made of gold or silver, or made of wood, you can do whatever you want to do from the eyes of that God, because its eyes don't work. You know what I'm saying? They're just a picture, if you please, a symbol of eyes, and so they're not true. But when you realize that there's a living God that sees everything that you do, then you're going to act a little bit different. When you realize that God is watching you, and then you realize that these false gods that you made with your hands, that they got ears, but they really can't hear anything. And so you can pray to them all you want to, and they're not going to suddenly answer your prayers because they're nothing. But Paul said, I want to introduce you to the God that is something, the living God. And so he went on and he said, I want you to know this is a ruse, worshiping these lifeless gods. And right now, that's what our country is experiencing in our places of higher education. The communists, the Chinese have infiltrated in all of our universities and colleges, and now, of course, they're going through our school system and teaching this critical race theory. And very, very frightening what they're teaching. And again, teaching that there is really no God except for the government is the ones that you need to learn to trust and believe in. So Paul says this in Acts 17:29, for as much then as we are the offspring of God, referring to the fact that life was created by God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone or graven by art and man's device. And again, he emphasized man's device, that those things were simply made of God. But folks, we were made of God. and everything that we have is unique to God. And it's interesting when we read in Genesis chapter 1, when we look at the beginning of the creation, it refers to Elohim, referring to the plurality of God. And again, there is only one God, so no misunderstanding. But God says, let us make man in our image. And so everyone that we look at today in our church services here, the lively young people and so forth that we saw earlier, we all have a body. And it's very, very apparent. And many times I've had people here in our church because of the influence of our young people that go, boy, wouldn't it be great to have that energy? And my first thought is I can see the body falling apart. They have that energy. You know what I'm saying? But we all have a body. And no matter what our age is, we have a body. At conception, the body begins, if you please. So all these things are so true. And again, God said, let us make man in our image. Jesus Christ, if you please, was the fleshly part of God. And then when we think of the soul of God, we think of God the Father. And so again, we all have a soul, we have a body, but we have a soul also. That's the innermost part of us that looks out through these windows here. And again, very exciting part. It's the part of us that will live on and on forever, either in heaven or in hell. I know that's not popular today either to use that word hell, unless you just use it as a curse word. But simply what I'm trying to say is that God said, let us create man in our image. And then finally, we come to all things of the Spirit. And God has given us all a spirit. And how exciting when we think of the Spirit of God, because it can indwell every one of us and help us to think in proper ways and to be used of God. And so, while the altars on Mars Hill were beautifully carved and made of, some cases, priceless materials that they were made of, they were adorned with all sorts of things. Many would have offerings actually laid before them. And some of these offerings were not, if you please, cheap by any means. They were very expensive as people were honoring this particular God. And again, it was all given to a dead God, something that did not exist except in the men, or in the minds of men. And maybe I should say the mind of the devil himself. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God and an everlasting King, according to Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 10. And so how true that is. The gods of this world offer no hope, for they have no life. I guess in one sense it'd be like bringing a Barbie doll in here, and you look at it and go, oh, those Barbie dolls are so pretty, aren't they? It's so beautiful. And you look and go, man, that's just really... But for somebody to come up here and start worshiping, go, man, that's so silly. But you might say, but this Barbie is special. You pull a string on the back and it goes, I love you. I love you. You know, and you go, wow, see, it's really special, you know. And then, of course, they got the baby dolls that can wet and do other things. But anyhow, we got the real things at our house. But what I'm trying to say is, how sad. And we think, well, that'd be stupid. A Barbie doll is just a doll. It's nothing more. It's just a doll. And it is. But that's what these idols were. They were nothing. And we think something's wrong with that person to be praying to that Barbie there and asking Barbie to give them this or that or whatever. Maybe they'd be saying, some little girl would be saying, Barbie, I want to look just like you when I grow up. When I become a teen, I want, whatever. But folks, it is sad that people actually do that. They worship things that are made by man instead of the living God that has created and made us. Man is looking for peace. He's looking for joy. He's looking for fulfillment. He's looking for contentment. But it will never be found in a stone statue or, if you please, a golden figurine. It can only be found in the living God. Again, the sinful nature leaves man's soul parched and dry, and the psalmist, he cries, My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. Psalms 42, verse 2. But see how personal that prayer is right there? It says, my soul thirsteth for God. You ever got thirsty? And I think we've all been thirsty at one time or another. And I was in a home here recently, and the people just said, I give you some water, but I don't trust our water, and we're out of bottled water. And I said, well, what's wrong with the water? Well, the city's got chlorine in it, and they got fluoride in there, and they started naming the list, and I know, okay. And fluoride can cause cancer, and it can cause dementia, and they started telling me, so I got an education real fast like that. I did not want to drink that water, you know what I'm saying? But you ever got thirsty? And maybe, I know it sounds terrible, but Sunday I got so thirsty, I went ahead and I drove that chlorine and the fluoride because I was just so thirsty, I had to have something, you know? And oftentimes when I run, especially in the summertime, when I run, especially if I run any distance, when I do 10 miles every so often now, and I do that 10 miles, you ready? I get thirsty. And what's amazing is before I do my run, when it's especially, you know, in the summertime, talking about maybe 100 degrees outside, but when I get ready to do my run, I'll weigh myself, and I'm serious, I will lose 8 to 12 pounds in that one run. And of course, y'all know, what did I lose? Water. And so guess what? I am really thirsty, and I will drink and drink and drink, trying to recoup that water. My son Caleb was a water diabetic, which many doctors think have heard of that, but he can literally die if he doesn't have a continual or constant amount of water to drink. And so he has to drink several gallons of water in a day's time. And anyhow, people just go, well, why does he drink so much? What's wrong with that? He's a water diabetic, that's what's wrong. And his body's not able to retain the fluids like ours does, because of certain chemicals that his pituitary gland would tell to produce or put into the water to keep it in his body. But he has no pituitary gland. It was cut out when he had brain surgery. So all that said, have you ever gotten thirsty? When Caleb drinks, you're around him, he's missed maybe 30 minutes of drinking. When he drinks, I mean, he drinks. I don't know if you've ever witnessed that, but he'll just sit there, I mean, like he's dying, like he's trying to put a fire out. So he knows what it is to get thirsty. And what I'm saying, we all know what it is to get thirsty. Have you ever gotten that way where, God, I just want to know more about you. God, I just need to know more about you, Lord. Folks, I don't mean this bad, but it's like we need to develop an addiction for God. The Bible actually uses that very wording in the New Testament, referring to those that were addicted to Christ and to basically to serving the servants of Christ. And exciting when you see that. And I think when I think of that, I think it's exciting. We got people that run a bus route right now and picking up people, and they get excited when there's a whole bunch of kids on that bus route. And so it's exciting. And what it is bringing people so that they can hear more about Christ. And it's an ability to serve God and see God working through them. So there should be a thirst to please and to know God. As we read that verse to you, my soul thirsted for God. And again, that's for the living God. These other gods could not meet the need because they're not gods. So again, we see the reality of a living God. We see the ruse of the lifeless style gods or lifeless gods. But the reality of a living God, on a gloomy day in Bethany, Jesus stood in the graveyard. And as he stood there, all around there were people that were sobbing. And if you please, if that was all you could see of the world, you think, man, the whole world's grieving. Everybody is so sorrowful. Everybody is so hurt. And no doubt the imps of hell trembled when the Son of God stepped into the presence of death. And as he did, the Son of God lifted his voice above the cloud of despair and all the people that were so upset. How many of us have not been to a funeral where it was almost like part of us had died because we were so close to those people that had perished? He said, I am the resurrection and the life. And he that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Yet here they were at the funeral of Lazarus. This is John chapter 11, verse 25 through 26. And yet Jesus, the shortest verse we find in the Bible, says Jesus wept. Wow. Such a short verse, but yet it says volumes about our great God, that he is touched by our infirmities, that he feels our hurts, he knows what we're going through. And you know, I come and say, I know exactly what you're going through. I really don't, because everybody's different, right? So how can I really know what you're going through? And I say, well, I've lost a father too, so I know what it is to lose a father. And to a point I do, but I don't know what your relationship was with your father, so it could be a completely different thing altogether. Maybe you had a very, very, very close relationship with your father. Maybe you had a real distant relationship with your father. So how can I say, I know what you're going through, because I lost my father too. And thank the Lord I didn't lose my father, I went to heaven. And so I'm thankful for that. But God knows exactly what you're going through. King Darius changed his mind about the living God. Regrettably, the king had allowed his entourage, or his people, his subjects, and specifically his politicians, to sign a decree saying that everybody had to pray to him, that they couldn't put forth any petitions without taking it through the king first. Wow. For him to even let them get this through to his mind, it is unbelievable. And so they brainwashed him and said, if anybody asks petitions of anyone else, then you need to throw them in the lion's den to teach them a lesson, let everybody know that they have to come to you because you are the all-powerful king. You go, oh, that sounds pretty good. I am pretty powerful and I am king. Yeah, okay. And then once he did it, the first thing that happened is when Daniel prayed publicly, and he prayed for the people of Babylon, as he would open his windows and pray, and maybe folks, maybe we need to be doing some of that too, and say, oh God, please help America. Please help our leaders to turn to you and turn away from the atheistic teachings of communism and socialism. And Lord, maybe we need to pray more publicly that way. Maybe the next time you get ready to eat a meal in a public place, whether it's, I saw you have McDonald's coat on, McDonald's or wherever you might be, just pray in such a way that others can hear you. And Daniel did it. And folks, he wasn't doing it to show off. He was doing it because he wanted people to see the heart of God. And so he let God's heart be revealed through him. And if you please, the mind of God was revealed through him. And they knew that they could catch Daniel in any type of corruption. They knew that they couldn't throw some sort of a harlot or something before him to cause him to stray and to fall and do wrong. They knew that they couldn't tempt him with some sort of bribes and say, we'll give you all this if you'll do this or whatever. And they knew that they couldn't corrupt him with offering extra power. He was already a very, very powerful man. And I can honestly say that even though King Darius was king, Daniel was the most powerful man in the kingdom. He was the most powerful man in the world because he had a great relationship with God. And so the power of God was at his fingertips, if you please, literally. And so when he prayed to God, they immediately had the guards rush up, grab him, take him away, and throw him in the lion's den. So Daniel chapter 6, verses 17 through 22, read this testimony concerning concerning Daniel. Y'all listening? Okay. And here's what it says. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. And here's the testimony. When he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. Now, folks, that's amazing, because the only way he can live forever is for the king to be saved, right? And so if the king was saved, he could and would live forever. My God, again, how personal, has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. He said, I prayed openly to my God. He said, everybody knows that, and I prayed in such a way that I wasn't guilty of standing against you, king, per se, because I prayed to my God like I always have. And then he went ahead and he said, king, I haven't done anything to hurt you. I was just talking to our God. Wow, what a testimony. Verse 24, and the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. So in other words, they didn't make it to the floor of the den. The lions jumped up, grabbed it, showing beyond a shadow of doubt, these lions were hungry. And the fact that Daniel was protected by an angel from these lions. Then King Darius wrote unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. Sounds almost like a preacher when you look at the message here. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God. Wow. And steadfast forever. And his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth. Who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lion? Again, we see what a personal thing this was to Daniel, and how personal it became to the king, because he realized how the king, or how Daniel's supreme king, ruled over all. So what gods are you trusting to deliver you? Are you trusting our government to help you to take care of you? Are you trusting a physician to help you with various ailments that you may have in your body? Are you trusting some financial wizard to help you concerning your financial future? What are we trusting? And again, we need to trust God and realize that he can take care of all of our needs. It's time to change your mind. We need people today like those in Thessalonica who turn to God from idols to serve the living and the true God, according to 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9. So we'll go ahead and stop there for right now. And so I guess we can turn off, Sean. Appreciate it. And we get to point number 2 next week, Lord willing. Okay. I see that look on your face. That Chris, like,